right, class, welcome to my office. This is going to be the this is going to be the wrap-up lecture for the vessels. There's just a little bit for fetal circulation and the first lecture for the lymphatic immune system. So let me switch this out into my annotation spotlight. Here we go into here. All right. We had left off talking about, hold on a second. That probably screwed some things up. Okay, hopefully that's back. The hepatic portal system. Okay, we went through some of the anatomy of the arteries, the veins, the portal system, and then the fetal circulation. Those are kind of the four things that you have to think about: arteries, veins, portal system. Actually, five things. Arteries, veins for systemic, pulmonary, which is just reversed, portal system, and then fetal circulation. Okay, so I'm wrapping up portal system and fetal system, fetal circulation. So this diagram here is really showing the overall diagram of the intestinal blood flow. Okay, so you have the mesenteric arteries for the midgut and the hindgut, which are the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries, which are servicing the intestines. Out from those would be a set of portal veins that are connecting the intestines to the liver. Okay, so that will bring nutrient-rich but oxygen-poor blood from the intestines to the liver. The liver needs oxygen, so it will receive its own fresh supply of blood, meaning oxygenated blood, via the hepatic artery. Once the liver has processed the blood, it leaves the liver in the hepatic vein. One more outflow here that is kind of helpful to understand is the bile duct. Okay, so part of what the liver is doing is filtering the blood and removing wastes that will be made into bile. That bile leaves in the bile duct, and the bile will enter, really could think of it as kind of looping back here, going back into the GI tract, because we get rid of bile in our feces. Anyways, but the hepatic vein here is taking the blood from the liver back to the heart, and then we start this loop all over again. And this is just a diagram showing you the portal veins, all the tributaries that are contributing to the portal vein, shown in black. So you have the right gastric, the hepatic portal, the superior mesenteric, the inferior mesenteric, and the splenic. Basically anything that's to the gut. The gut includes everything from the stomach down to the rectum. Okay. All right. So jumping into the last part here is the fetal circulation. Okay. Now, the main thing that you have to remember for fetal circulation is that the baby is in utero, it's in the womb, okay, therefore not breathing, has surrounded with amniotic fluid, so there's no gas exchange happening in the lungs, right? So the baby is getting all of its oxygen via the placenta. This is the diagram or picture illustration of the placenta. Placenta, think of like the lungs, but it's really this interface between mommy's blood and baby's blood, and there's gas exchange occurring between mommy's blood and baby's blood in the placenta. Okay, it's how baby gets oxygen from mommy's blood. Okay, and so you have the reversal of terms here, the umbilical vein and the umbilical arteries, bringing, in this case, the reference point is not mommy's heart for away versus towards. It is the baby's heart. Okay, so the umbilical vein is moving towards the baby's heart. The umbilical arteries are moving away from the baby's heart. Okay, because we have two hearts, right? You have mommy's heart and baby's heart. So which is the away, which is the towards? In this case, we're talking about the baby, so it's away or away from or back towards the baby's heart. So principle number one: avoid the lungs. Okay, because blood flow going to the lungs is useless in the fetus. So there's a couple of mechanisms there. There's the foramen ovale, which moves the blood directly from the right atrium into the left atrium. Okay, foramen ovale does that, and the ductus arteriosus, moves blood from the pulmonary trunk directly into the aorta. Okay, in both cases, those are two mechanisms to bypass pulmonary circuit. Okay, and dump it right into the systemic circuit. The other one that you will see here highlighted in yellow is the ductus venosus. Ductus venosus is where the umbilical vein, which is bringing that red oxygenated blood into the fetal circulation. And it is this connection between the hepatic portal system and going right into the inferior vena cava. Okay, so ductus venosus does that because bringing in that fresh oxygenated blood. The umbilical arteries and umbilical veins go together. Okay, so it's really three structures in the baby, and then there's the umbilical cord, which contains two umbilical arteries and one umbilical vein. The umbilical arteries are one off of the common iliac arteries. That's why there's two of them, because they're connected at the common iliac. All right, so after birth, then these structures here no longer move blood. They actually shrivel up. You can think of, they kind of condense and they become ligaments. And that's found on the sheet, okay, the list of vessels that you have. Righty. So know the fetal circulation. Okay, this diagram here shows just shortly after delivery that the hole is closed, the hole between the atria closes off, and then this ductus arteriosus closes off as well. All right. Patent foramen valley just means that it's retained into childhood. Okay, it should have closed off, but it didn't close off fully. Okay, so patent means it's still present. It shouldn't be present, but it's still present. All the other ones you don't need to know. All right, let's move into the next set of notes, which is the Chapter 22, the lymphatic and immune system. Okay, lymphatic and immune system. Our next chapter. And so the progression here is we've just finished 3 chapters on the cardiovascular system. We talked about the blood, we talked about the heart, and we finished off with the vessels. Okay, 3 chapters on cardiovascular. Because the lymphatic system contains vessels, which we're going to talk about lymphatic vessels, we talk about it next in the progression of topics in A&P2, because we're going to talk about lymphatic vessels and how they're similar to veins. Okay. Attached to this topic of the lymphatic system is the topic of the immune system, because they are so closely related to each other functionally and structurally that they're hard to distinguish. So this is a nice diagram that loosely organizes how we think about the lymphatic system, displayed in green, and the systemic circuit shown in the red and the blue. Okay, we're familiar with how arteries are depicted in red because of oxygenated blood, and how blue indicates the venous system, showing the deoxygenated blood. In green, okay, green is the color that is by convention used for the lymphatic system. Okay, lymph is not green. Okay, bile is actually kind of a greenish color, but lymph is not, but it's depicted as green. So whenever you see green, you're going to think lymphatic system, lymph vessels, lymph nodes, lymph. Okay, green. That's just a convention. Okay, when we're talking about these topics. So where we're here in the systemic capillaries, we talked about the different pressures that are operant here, the capillary hydrostatic pressure and the osmotic or oncotic pressure. And we said that during filtration that not all of the fluid that exits the capillary returns during reabsorption. There's a small percentage, 3.6 liters per day, stays in the tissues and actually goes into the lymphatic system. Okay, so here in green is this lymphatic system. It's a one directional set of vessels punctuated by lymph nodes. You can see here's a lymph node, here's a lymph node. There's actually many more lymph nodes. There's just 2 shown here in the diagram. But the lymph is just another set of vessels that brings fluid back. Where does it end up? Into the vena cava. Okay, the superior vena cava is where lymph ends up. Okay, so we start off as fluid in the capillaries. We're going to end up with fluid in the venous system. let it ring because hold on a second. Hello, this is Josh. So, telemarketer. Let's go. So here are the points that we're going to talk about: the lymphatic system, the vessels, lymphedema, lymphocytes, the cells that are part of the immune system. We're going to talk about specific lymphoid tissues that exist around the body. The lymph nodes, the thymus, and the spleen are specific lymphatic organs. We're going to learn the difference between a lymphatic organ and lymphatic tissue. We'll talk about the immune system. Okay, so the first part of this chapter is about the lymphatics, which is mostly fluid movement. And the last part is about the immune system, which is the lymphocytes and all the other immune cells that are playing a role in innate and adaptive immunity. So we'll talk about innate immunity, we'll talk about adaptive immunity, interferon, complement, inflammation, fever. Those are all topics that we'll talk about as we progress. All right, three main functions here, okay? Three main functions. Let me see where I can put this where it's not in the way, okay, of lymphatic immune. Okay, first one, manage excess fluid. Okay, so we have a nice water droplet there indicating that interstitial fluid is remaining in the tissues. Okay, and so some of that excess fluid that's just out in the tissues gets additional processing through the lymphatic system. That's very important. Number two, immune surveillance. That is, this is the system that is continually searching, surveying, okay, watching out for bad guys. Okay, when I say bad guys, I mean microbes that want to cause us harm. Okay, bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, other cellular debris that can otherwise accumulate in our bodies. This system is surveying for those bad guys and removing them from the system, okay, or rendering them harmless. Thirdly, and lastly, and importantly, processing of lipids, okay? Part of the lymphatic system is about processing lipids from the digestive system. Sounds kind of like a weird thing, but lipids are processed differently than carbohydrates, proteins, and amino acids, okay? So absorption and movement of lipids in the lacteals, which is part of the lymphatic system. All right. So again, back to this concept of the lymphatic system and the immune system are so closely associated that we treat them together in one chapter, okay? So when we think about lymphatics, these are the topics that we're going to be talking about. Fluids, macrophages, lymphocytes, lipids, hormones. And then we have the immune system. And so there's parts of the immune system that are not part of the lymphatic system, like the thymus. The thymus has nothing to do with moving lymph, okay? It's the spleen, the neutrophils, the innate immune system is really its own thing. It has really nothing to do with lymphatics, but they work together, so we talk about them together. There's a great deal of overlap here. All right, so background, okay, pathogens. A pathogen is it's usually a microorganism, okay? It's usually a small living thing that can get in us or on us and cause pathology. Pathology is disease, okay? So we're talking about viruses, bacteria, fungi, okay, and parasites, parasitic worms and other parasites. Each attacks in a unique way. It is harmful to us in a unique way, and so our immune system can detect them slightly differently. So the lymphatic system protects us against disease, okay? In a very similar way as we talked about the white blood cells as kind of sentries or guardians or policemen that are kind of looking out for bad guys, those white blood cells play a role in the lymphatic system, the lymphocytes and the neutrophils and the monocytes, by defending the body, okay? Surveillance and defense. Those are like watching out and taking care of the bad guy when it is identified. So there's three categories here: environmental pathogens, that is microbes outside of us that can get inside of us. We call those foreign cells. Okay, think about like E. coli or whatever. Toxins, that is external or foreign chemicals or proteins that are external to us that can get in us and cause us harm. Okay, like Shiga toxin or whatever. And then abnormal self cells, like body cells. So think about cancer. Cancer cells are our own cells that have become defective and are replicating without regulation. Those are called bad self. So we're going to talk about immunity. Immunity is the ability to resist infection and disease. Okay, immunity is the ability to resist infection and disease. Hopefully, if COVID has taught us anything, it is a more clear and precise understanding of what immunity actually means, rather than media talking points. So all body cells and tissues involved in production of the immunity, not just the lymphatic system. So immunity is a bigger topic than just lymphatics, but we include them together. All right, there are special defense systems like the lymphocytes. They're involved in the adaptive immune system. We have non-specific defenses, which are like the barriers or skin, any types of fluids like mucus that can protect us and be washing away microbes before they get inside of us. Then we have general phagocytic cells like neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages, and dendritic cells, which can, by gobbling up or doing phagocytosis, they can mitigate the threat of infection. So we're going to talk about lymph, we're going to talk about the vessels, we're going to talk about the tissues. Okay, so lymph is the fluid. Okay, in its constitution, it is very similar to plasma and interstitial fluid. Okay, plasma is the watery part of blood, and interstitial fluid is the same consistency. Plasma becomes interstitial fluid, which becomes lymph, and then lymph, once it flows through the system, becomes plasma again. So it's a nice cycle that lymph is just one aspect of this fluid as it's continually moving through the body. The vessels are like veins. Okay, they're going to be physical characteristics, which they're more like a vein than they are an artery because of the thickness of the wall, the dimensions, and the presence of valves. The lymphoid tissues and organs are a specific set of structures throughout the body where lymphocytes are produced or stored. Okay, so these lymphocytes need to do their job. They're born somewhere. Think about the bone marrow and the thymus. And then they're stored places like the lymph nodes, the spleen, and other lymphoid tissues like MALTs, okay, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues. So let's review some of the anatomy here. Okay, so in green, of course, are the lymphatic vessels. And you can see little dots along the way. Those would be lymph nodes. There are collections of lymph nodes in the places where our limbs attach to the body, in the groin and in the armpit. Okay, that's where we have higher concentration, higher clusters of lymph nodes. Also, along the neck and along the jawline, we'll usually have a cluster of lymph nodes as we're draining lymph from the face and the head, because our face and head has openings in it. And so we're exposed to microbes in a higher proportion in our face and head. Okay, our nose, our mouth, our ears to a lesser degree, our eyes, all of those are inputs into the body because they're not covered with just regular skin. Okay, the rest of our body's covered with skin. Our mouth, our mucous membranes here are a little bit more susceptible. Therefore, we need collections of lymph nodes in close proximity so that they can detect a microbe as soon as it enters the body. Okay, we're going to talk about the tonsils there, and they play a role. So those are the lymph vessels. Those are the lymph nodes. And then we have lymphoid organs. Okay, so lymph organs would be the thymus, the spleen. Those are the primary lymph organs, thymus and spleen. And they have lymphoid tissues. Okay, a tissue means it's part of another organ, but it's a little patch or cluster where there's a collection of lymphocytes. And so one thing you'll notice, the tonsils are, it's hard to say if that's a tissue or an organ, but the tonsils are a tissue. And then we have these mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues, M-A-L-T, MALT, not like a chocolate malt, but M-A-L-T, mucosa. So it's part of the mucous membranes. So they're found in the intestines. They're also found, the tonsils qualify as a MALT. And we have other regions around the body where we have these pockets of immune cells, okay, lymphocytes. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about the specific ducts that make up the important lymphatic ducts that you need to know, kind of memorize. There's only like 3 or 4 that you need to know. And then we have, of course, lymphatic vessels all over our body. Wherever we see blood vessels, we're going to have lymphatic vessels. The bone marrow is where some of those lymphocytes are born. The appendix contains a special collection of lymphocytes. Okay, so the anatomy is pretty easy for the lymphatic system. So we're going to talk about later. We're going to talk about the immune system. Lymphocyte production is happening in the bone marrow. And then some of the development of the lymphocytes is happening also in the thymus, okay? And then we're storing, and the lymphocytes are stored in specific places where those are occurring. All right. Second. I'm supposed to be at a meeting right now and I missed it. It's okay. Pressing on. Lymphocyte circulation. All right, so many things. The fluids, right? We talked about how the lymph comes from blood plasma, so arterial blood, and then lymph ultimately becomes part of the venous system because it dumps back into the superior vena cava. Righty? Well, there's this diagram again. We start off here in the kind of the capillary system, I should say, and then flow through the lymphatic system, dump into the venous system at the end, and then back into the heart, and then the lymph becomes plasma again. So the lymphatic capillaries are analogous to what I call a cul-de-sac, right? So here's a neighborhood. The cul-de-sac is kind of a dead-end road. And so these are the lymphatic capillaries. So the pinkish tissue here is the interstitial space. There's fluid that can accumulate there from the capillary exchange, capillary filtration, and the excess fluid will build up and then eventually spill into, due to a pressure gradient. This pressure is very small, but there's a slight pressure gradient going into the lymphatic system, and it dumps into the system through these endothelial cells, which are, again, the name for the simple squamous cells that line the lymphatic system. And so they enter through these little gaps between the endothelial cells. It's not like a one-way valve that allows fluid to enter the lymphatic system, but not to exit. Kind of a strange setup, but that is how it works. And then once the interstitial fluid enters the lymphatic capillary, we change the name from interstitial fluid to lymph, okay? Lymph is called lymph when it enters the lymph capillary. And then all the way through the lymph vessel, it's called lymph. So we start off these pockets rather than tubes. The lymphatic vessels have large diameters, similar to the vein. They have thinner walls, similar to a vein. And they also contain valves, which there's a point that's on a future slide that will mention that. Usually have a flat or irregular outline in a sectional view, again, similar to a vein. Okay, so this is the diagram. Here you can see these capillaries. The interstitial space is indicated in pink, and the green is showing you the capillary, the lymphatic capillaries. And then the flow is not under any force, okay? So in the circulatory system, in the cardiovascular system, we have the heart. The heart is the motive force. It's the thing pumping the blood, right? It's due to the heart pumping that moves the fluid from the arterioles into the veins. Lymph does not have a pump. Okay, so the two pumps that we learned about in the venous system, we talked about the muscular pump, like our gastrocnemius flexing, and our respiratory pump. Those are the same motive forces that move lymph back through the system. Okay, so it's a very low pressure system. There's not much movement of this fluid, but it eventually will drain back upward into the superior vena cava. Okay, some diagrams here. Those endothelial cells have a loosely bound association between neighboring endothelial cells and allows for the passage of interstitial fluid entering into the capillary. Okay, lymphatic flow starts in the vessels, travels to the veins. Lacteals, okay, we're going to talk about the location of those. Those are associated with the intestines, okay? Lacteals are found in the intestines, okay? They're lymphatic capillaries located in the intestines, and their chief responsibility is to absorb lipids, okay? Lacteals has the name like lactose. You'd think like lactose, like milk, right? It has nothing to do with milk, but anatomists, when they were doing dissections on people and they would cut into these vessels, they had a milky white appearance because of the lipid content, and therefore they named them the milk vessels, lacteals. Okay, even though it's not milk, they had a kind of a creamy appearance because of the lipid content. Weird way to name stuff. All right. So if we were to do a cross section through any part of the body, you could see an artery, okay, and its physical characteristics. So you see the vein with its characteristics, which are distinct from the artery, and we see the lymphatic vessels, which are more like the vein than they are the artery. Okay, very thin wall, floppy, okay, large diameter, but relatively thin wall. Okay, here is a picture of an electro micrograph showing the lymphatic valve. This little V shape like this is showing you the structures that allow one-way movement of lymph through the lymphatic system. Just double checking that I have. So we have superficial and deep lymphatics. The deep lymphatics are the large vessels that accompany the deep arteries and the deep veins. Okay, the superficial and the deep lymphatics converge upon two ducts. Okay, this is the end point for all lymph, is located in the mediastinum. Okay, the mediastinum is the middle area here. We have the thoracic duct, which is a elongated lymphatic duct that collects all the lymph and returns it to the left side, okay, the left subclavian vein. And then we have the right lymphatic duct, which is this very short duct that is returning to the right subclavian vein. Okay, and then together they dump into the superior vena cava. So here's a nice diagram showing you some of that anatomy. Okay, those structures highlighted in red are the ones that you should be aware of. Okay, so you can see the right and the left subclavian vein dumping into the superior vena cava. The heart is missing, of course. This long green structure that is running right up anterior to the vertebral column is the thoracic duct. Okay, it's one long, it's the largest of the lymphatic vessels, and it empties, all the lymph flows superiorly, and then you can see it loops around and it dumps here right at the juncture between the left subclavian vein and the left jugular vein. Okay, right there is where lymph from 3/4 of the body is returning to the venous system. Okay, notice this diagram here on the left. You can see the darker color is showing you the drainage field, as it were, from where lymph is arising from in the body. And all of this pattern here, you can see the lower torso, both of the legs, and the left arm and left head, all are dumping here into the left subclavian vein. Here's this relatively much more small and short right lymphatic duct, okay? And that is draining the right part of the head, the right part of the neck, the right shoulder and torso, and the right arm, okay? It's a very unique distribution pattern, but that all goes into the right lymphatic duct. Okay, the right jugular. So in the lymphatic system, we have trunks, okay? Instead of calling them a vessel, we call them a trunk, okay? So you have the right jugular trunk. Guess where that's coming from? From the right side of the head. You have the left jugular trunk. It's coming from the left side of the head. You have the left subclavian trunk and the right subclavian trunk. Those are coming from the limbs. And we have the left lumbar trunk and the right lumbar trunk. Those are coming from the legs, okay? So anatomy is pretty easy because we know approximately where those are located. At the bottom of the thoracic duct, okay, this green structure is the thoracic duct. At the very bottom, you see this enlargement. It's called the cisterna chyli. Okay, there's an enlargement at the inferior end of the thoracic duct called the cisterna chyli. And into it, okay, think of that as the dumping point for the right leg, the left leg, and the intestines. Okay, the right leg, the left leg, and the intestines are dumping their lymph, okay, into the cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli drains superiorly up into the thoracic duct, which then will dump into the the left subclavian vein. All right, that's the anatomy of the lymphatic system. These are some of the terms there we've just gone through. Lymphedema, okay, so lymphedema is a blockage of lymph drainage from a limb. Okay, so regular edema can be caused by a number of different reasons, but lymphedema comes from a blockage in a lymphatic vessel. Okay, so it still results in just what we would call edema, but the reasons are different than, let's say, too much salt or some other reason. Okay, causes severe swelling, interferes with immune function. Okay, so you have poor lymphatic drainage, therefore we're not able to do immune surveillance as efficiently because we're not able to circulate those fluids. The lymph nodes can't see pathogens as they're floating through the lymph nodes. Lymphocytes are the one of the 5 different types of white blood cells, lymphocytes, 20 to 40% of circulating lymphocytes. Never let monkeys eat bananas, right? So the L there is 30% of total white blood cells. There are 3 types of lymphocytes: T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. Okay, T cells, named for the thymus, B cells, named for the bone marrow, and NK or natural killer cells, which are a unique type of cell that we'll talk about. So let's start with T cells and talk about those first. T cells make up 80% of the circulating lymphocytes. So the vast majority of lymphocytes are T cells. Okay, and that's because there's a bunch of subtypes there that are relatively important. Okay, T cells. There's the 4 types are here. You have cytotoxic T cells, which you see the T subtype C. You have memory T cells. You have helper T cells, which are the T subtype H. Okay, you don't see T subtype M for memory cells. You just call them memory T cells for some odd reason. And then the suppressor T cells, okay, which is the T subtype S. So I'm going to give you an easy way to memorize these. So just don't worry about that just yet. So cytotoxic T cells, okay? Cytotoxic T cells, you want to think cell-to-cell combat, okay? Cell-to-cell combat. Think about these T cells will meet a foreign cell and battle it, okay? And actually do cell-to-cell. They contact in each other, and the cytotoxic T cell can destroy foreign cells. Memory T cells are not fighters. They are rememberers because they remember foreign antigens, okay? And they will go camp out in some lymphoid tissue for the rest of your life and provide adaptive immunity, okay? Helper T cells are the middleman, okay? They are handling the incoming information about a pathogen and then relaying that information to the appropriate effector of the immune system, most notably the cytotoxic T cells or the B cells. Okay, so helper cells are a middleman. They help to manage the exchange of pathological information from the adaptive immune system to the from the innate immune system, to the adaptive immune system. Now we're going to get into these cell markers. I'm just going to introduce it right now because I think it's super easy to memorize. Okay, so what you're going to learn is that helper T cells, okay, are indicated by this protein marker called CD4. You have CD4 positive cells, and you have CD8 positive cells. You also have CD25, okay? But for now, the ones you have to really memorize are CD4 and CD8, okay? The convenient thing about CD4 is you take the numeral 4, okay, kind of looks kind of like this, the numeral 4, and you flip it upside down, it looks like an H, lowercase h. So 4, flip it upside down, looks like an H, T helper cell. T helper cells are CD4 positive. Boom, done. Also, check this out, okay? CD8 cells, okay? If you take the numeral 8, right? Take a top circle and the bottom circle, okay? It kind of looks like 2 cells fighting each other. Those are cytotoxic T cells. Cytotoxic T cells are CD8 positive cells, okay? So super easy way to memorize CD4 positive versus CD8 positive. 8 is cytotoxic T cells, cell-to-cell combat, okay? CD4, and forget how to hold my hand, okay? The helper cells are CD4 positive. Suppressor cells are cells that their whole job is to, once we have this immune response, this kind of amplification of reactivity of the immune system, these cells are to suppress the immune system after an appropriate response to say, hey, okay, we've done our job. Let's all quiet down and let's reduce that immunogenicity and to inhibit the function of T cells and B cells. Okay, which seems counterintuitive, but once we've activated the T cells and the B cells, they need to be kind of quieted back down and kind of sent to their rooms for their adaptive responsibilities. Regulatory T cells, again, are doing regulation. They help the helper cells and they help the suppressor cells. They're kind of a general assistant cell, regulatory T cells. So those are your T cells, okay? The B cells are easy, okay? B cells make antibodies, okay? So I noticed that the red font of the B here, B cells make antibodies. Notice the B of antibodies is also in red, and that's the mnemonic. B cells make antibodies. B cells, when they're naive, okay, are called B cells. When B cells are activated and are actually making antibodies, we call them plasma cells, okay, for not because they're making plasma or that they live in the plasma, blood plasma. So it's a little bit of a strange name, plasma cells. Why, oh, why are we having all these terms in anatomy where they don't quite match where they're from or what they're doing? But all that aside is you have to memorize that an activated B cell is called a plasma cell. All right. Antibodies, we're going to learn a lot more details about B cells and antibodies in just a bit. Some definitions here. An antigen, okay? An antigen is any molecule that elicits an antibody response, okay? It's usually a foreign molecule. It could be the cell surface marker of a bacterium, okay? LPS is an antigen, so lipopolysaccharide is this cell surface marker on lots of bacteria. It could be a protein, it could be a lipid, it could be lots of things, could be an antigen. Okay, antigen is a generic term for anything that your immune cells identify as foreign. Okay, that is a foreign thing, that is a foreign cell, that's a foreign protein, that's a foreign chemical. All those things could be an antigen. Okay, and it's usually a small little bit of the antigen. If the antigen is this big and the antibody only binds this little bit, just this little part of the knuckle would be what's called the epitope. The antigen is the whole molecule. The epitope would be just the part that the antibody can bind to. We're going to talk more about that. Natural killer cells. Okay, we talked about B cells, and we talked about T cells, and now natural killer cells, okay, NK cells. They are the most rare form of the lymphocytes, and they kill our natural cells. So again, it's kind of easy to remember. Natural killer cells kill our natural cells. What are natural cells? Well, they're our cells. They're Josh's cells or human cells. They're not microbes, okay? They're not parasites. They're human cells. Why would you attack a human cell? Well, if they're infected with a virus, okay, virally infected cells are our natural cells that are now no good, okay, can cause harm because now they're full of virus. Or cancer cells, right? Those are our cells that are now creating problems in the body. So natural killer cells kill our natural cells, okay, which have been infected or are now cancerous. Alrighty, so here's some diagrams here. T cells, there's 4 different types: cytotoxic, the helper, suppressor, and the memory. Okay, and the Tregs are in there as too, but they're not part of the suppressor cells, frankly. And then the B cells make antibodies. They've become from naive B cells into plasma cells. Now you're going to notice a big difference between all B cells, okay, and plasma cells. Notice that what's surrounding the nucleus here is a bunch of endoplasmic reticulum, okay? Endoplasmic reticulum, that is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Remember your cell biology? What's the rough ER doing? Okay. What you should think when you're answering that question is, well, the rough ER is studded with ribosomes. That's rough versus smooth. So the rough means you see these tiny little ribosomes all over the place. What's a ribosome do? Well, ribosome does protein synthesis. Protein synthesis means we're making proteins. What are antibodies? antibodies are proteins. So all of this rough endoplasmic reticulum are just a whole bunch of making antibodies. Okay, that's all these cells do is it's like a factory for making antibodies. Natural killer cells are here. Again, those are detecting our natural cells that are virally infected or cancer cells. All righty. That is where I'm going to stop. Okay, 40 minutes short lecture today. See you guys in class.